Right now, again tucked behind low rocks, the three of us could look down and see the village 1.5 miles distant, and it remained our objective. Again, I told Mikey, if we can just make it down there and get some cover, we'll take 'em out, all out on flat ground. I knew we were not in great shape, but we were still SEALs. Nothing can ever take that away. We were still confident, and we were not going to surrender. Even if it came down to it, we would fight to the death with our knives against their guns. Fuck surrender, said Mikey. And he had no idea to explain further. No need to explain further, either to Axe or me. Surrender would have been a disgrace to our community, like ringing the bell at the edge of the grinder and putting your helmet in the line. No one who had made it through this far to this no man's land in the Afghan mountains would have dreamed of giving up. Remember the philosophy of the U.S. Navy SEALs. I will never quit. My nation expects me to be physically harder and mentally stronger than my enemies. If knocked down, I will get back up every time. I will draw on every remaining ounce of my strength to protect my teammates. I am never out of the fight. Those words have sustained many brave men down the years, and they were engraved upon the soul of every SEAL, and they were in the minds of us all. Suddenly said, above the rage of battle, remember, bro, we're never out of it. I nodded tersely. It's only about another 1,000 yards to flat ground. If we can get down there, we got a chance. Trouble was, we couldn't get down there. At least not right then, because once more, we were pinned down. And we faced the same dilemma. The only escape was to go down, but our only defense strategy was to go up. Once more, we had to get off this ground, away from the ricochets, back up the left flank. We were trying to fight the battle our way, but even though we were still going, we were battered half to death. I led the way back up the rocks, blasting away, shooting down anyone I could see. But they cut on to that real quick, and now they really unloaded on us. Russian-made rocket grenades coming straight down our right flank. Their right flank, our left. The ground shook. The very few trees swayed. The noise was worse than any blast all day. Even the walls of this little canyon shook. The stream splashed over its banks. This was one gigantic Taliban effort to finish us. We hit the deck, jamming ourselves into the rocky crevice, heads down to avoid the lethal flying debris, rock fragments, and shrapnel. As before, they did not kill anyone with this type of thunderous bombardment, and as before, they waited till the dust had cleared and then opened fire again. Above me, I could see the tree line. It was not close, but it was nearer to the village. But the Taliban knew our objective, and as we tried to fight our way forward, they drove us back with sheer weight of fire. We tried against all odds and just could not make it. They knocked us back again, and we retreated down, making a long, pathetic loop back the way we come. But once more we landed in a good spot, a sound defensive position, well protected by the rock face on either side. Again we tried to take the fight to them, picking our targets and driving them back, making some ground now toward the village. They were up and screaming at us, yelling that the battle had almost come to close quarters. We yelled right back and kept firing. But there were still so many of them, and they got into better position and shot Mikey Murphy through the chest. He came toward me, asking if I could give him another magazine. And then I saw Axe stumbling toward me, his head pushed out, blood running down his face, bubbling out of the most shocking head wound. They shot me, bro, he said. The bastards shot me. Can you help me, Marcus? What could I say? What could I do? I couldn't help except by trying to fight off the enemy, and Axe was standing right in my line of fire. I tried to get him to get down behind the rock, and I turned to Mikey, who was obviously badly hurt now. Can you move, buddy? I asked him. And he groped into his pocket for his mobile phone, the one we had dared not use because it would betray our position. And then Lieutenant Murphy walked out into the open ground. He walked until he was more or less in the center, gunfire all around him, and he sat on a small rock and began punching in numbers to HQ. I could hear him talking. My men are taking heavy fire. We're getting picked apart. My guys are dying out here. We need help. And right then, Mikey took a bullet straight to the back. I saw the blood spurt from his chest. He slumped forward, dropping his phone and rifle. But then he braced himself, grabbed them both, sat upright again, and once more put the phone to his ear. I heard him speak again. Roger that, sir. Thank you. Then he stood up and staggered out to our bad position, the one guarding our left, and Mikey just started firing again, firing at the enemy. And he was hitting them, too, having made that one last desperate call to base, the one that might yet save us if they could send help in time before we were overwhelmed. Only I knew what Mikey had done. He'd understood we had only one realistic chance, and that was to call to help. He also knew there was only one place from which he could possibly make that cell phone work, out in the open, away from the cliff walls. Knowing the risk, understanding the danger, and in full knowledge that phone call could cost him his life, Lieutenant Michael Patrick Murphy, son of Marine, fiance of beautiful Heather, walked out into the firestorm. His objective was clear: to make one last valiant attempt to save his two teammates. He made the call, made the connection. He reported our approximate position, the strength of our enemy, and how serious the situation was. When they shot him, I thought mortally. He kept talking. Roger that, sir. Thank you. Will those words ever dim in my memory, even if I live to be 100? Will I ever forget them? Would you? And was there ever a greater SEAL team commander, an officer who fought to the last and, perhaps his dying move, risked everything to save his remaining men? I doubt there was ever anyone better than Mikey, cool under fire, always thinking, fearless about issuing the one option command even if it was nearly impossible. And then the final, utterly heroic act, not a gesture, an act of supreme valor. Lieutenant Mikey was a wonderful person and a very, very great SEAL officer. And if they built a memorial to him as high as the Empire State Building, it won't ever be high enough for me. Mikey was still alive and he carried on, holding the left, and I stayed to the right, both of us firing carefully and accurately. I was trying to reach the slightly higher ground, but the depleted army of the Taliban was determined that I should not get it, and every time I tried to advance even a few yards, get even a few feet higher, they drove me back. Mikey, too, was still trying to climb higher, and he actually made it some of the way into a rock strata above where I was standing. It was a good spot from which to attack, but defensively poor, and I knew this surely must be Mikey's last stand. Just then, Axewhite walked right up to me in kind of a daze, making only a marginal attempt at staying at cover in the rocks. Then I saw the wound, the right side of his head, almost blown away, and I shouted, "Axe, Axe! Come on, old buddy, get down here, right down there." I was pointing to the one spot in the rocks we might find protection, and he tried to raise his hand, an act of confirmation that he'd heard me, but he couldn't, and he kept walking, slowly, hunched forward, no longer clutching his rifle. He was just down to just his pistol, but I knew he could not hold that, aim, and fire. At least he was headed for cover, even though no one could survive a head wound like that. I knew Axe was dying. Mikey was still firing, and then suddenly I heard him scream my name, the most bone-chilling, primeval scream. "Help me, Marcus. Please help me." He was my best friend in all the world, but he was 30 yards up the mountain, and I could not climb to him. I could hardly walk, and if I moved 2 yards out of my protected position, they would have hit me with 100 bullets. Nonetheless, I edged out around the rocks to try to give him covering fire, to force these bastards back, give him a breather until I could find a way to get up to where it was to get up there without getting mowed down. And all the time he was screaming, calling out my name, begging me to help him live, and there was nothing I could do except die with him. Even then, with a couple of magazines left, I still believed I could nail these fuckers in turbans and somehow save him and Axe. I just wanted Mikey to stop screaming, for his agony to end. But every few seconds he cried out for me again, and every time it happened I felt like I'd been stabbed. And there were tears welling uncontrollably out of my eyes, not for the first time this day. I would have done anything for Mikey. I'd have laid down my own life for him. But my death right there on this outrock of crops was not going to save him. If I could save him, it would be by staying alive. And then suddenly, as it began, the screaming stopped. There was a silence for a few seconds, and even if those Taliban warriors understood that Mikey had died, I moved slowly forward and looked up there in time to see 4 of them come down and fire several rounds into his fallen body. The screaming had stopped for everyone except me. I still hear Mikey every night. I still hear the scream above all other things, even above the death of Danny Dietz. For several weeks I thought I might be losing my mind because I could never push it aside. There were 1 or 2 frightening occasions when I heard it in broad daylight and found myself pressed up against a wall, my hands covering my ears. And I always thought these kinds of psychiatric problems were suffered by other people, ordinary people, but not by Navy SEALs. I know that now, the reality of them, and I also doubt whether I will ever sleep through the night again. Danny was dead, Mikey was now dead, and Axe was dying. Right now, there were 2 of us, and only just. I resolved to walk down to where Axe was hiding and die right there with him. There I was, I knew, unlikely to be a way out. And there was still maybe 50 of the enemy, perhaps now, hunting only me. It took me nearly 10 minutes, firing back behind my sporadically to try to pin them down just in case. I was firing on the wild chances there was a shot at survival. that somehow Mikey's phone call might have let have these guys up here in for one last ditch rescue. When I reached Axe, he was sitting in a hollow and he'd fixed a temporary bandage on the side of his head. I stared at him, wondering where those cool blue eyes of his had gone. The eyes in which I could now see my own reflection were blood black, and the sockets filled with the terrible wound from his skull. I smiled at him because I knew we would not walk this way again, at least not together, not on this earth. Axe did not have long, and if he'd been in the finest hospital in North America, Axe would still not have had long. The life was ebbing out of him, and I could see this powerful super athlete growing weaker by the second. Hey, man, I said, you're all fucked up, and I tried pitifully to fix the bandage. Marcus, they got us good, man. He spoke with difficulty and tried to concentrate, and then he said, you stay alive, Marcus, and tell Cindy I love her. Those were his last words, and I just sat there, and that was where I planned to stay, right there with Axe, so he wouldn't be alone when the end came. I didn't give a flying fuck what happened to me anymore. Quietly, I had made my peace with God, and I thanked him for protecting me and saving my rifle, which somehow I still had. I never took my eyes off Axe, who was semi-conscious but still breathing. Along with the other two, Axe will always be a hero to me. Throughout this brief but brutal conflict, he fought like a wounded tiger, like Audie Murphy, like Sergeant York. They shot away his body, crippled his brain, but not his spirit. They never got that. Matthew Gene Axelson, husband of Cindy, fired at the enemy until he could no longer hold his rifle. He was just past his 29th birthday, and in his dying moments, I never took my eyes off him. I don't think he could hear me any longer, but his eyes were open and we were still together, and I refused to allow him to die alone. Right then, they must have seen us, because one of those super powerful Russian grenades came in, landed close, and blew me sideways, right out of the hollow, across the rough ground, and over the edge of the goddamn ravine. I lost consciousness before I hit the bottom, and when I came to, I was in a different hollow, and my first thought was I had been blinded by the explosion because I couldn't see a thing. However, after a few seconds, I gathered my wits and realized I was upside down in a freaking hole. I still had my eyesight and a few other working parts, but my left leg seemed paralyzed too, and, to a lesser degree, so was my right. It took me God knows how long to wriggle out of the flat ground and crawl my way into the cover of the rock. My ears were zinging, I guess from the blast of the grenade, and I looked up and saw I had fallen a pretty good way down, but I was too disorientated to put a number on it. The main difference between now and then, when I'd been sitting with Axe, was that the gunfire had ceased. If they'd reached Axe, who could not possibly have lived through that blast, they might not have bothered to go on shooting. They obviously had not found me, and I would not have been hard to locate upside down in a hole. But whatever. No one seemed to be looking. For the first time in maybe an hour and a half, I was apparently not actively being hunted. I'm going to break again.